White Mage. The old reliable, the OG Final Fantasy healer. You can't go wrong picking White Mage. Unless you hate spinning, in which case you can go wrong. Horribly, horribly wrong. But we're here to look at the state of White Mage, meaning we're gonna look at how popular White Mage has been throughout Savage and Ultimates in Endwalker. We're gonna form educated guesses and ultimately see where White Mage has ended up in the eyes of raiders with Endwalker's last raid tier. But first, we're gonna look back at the data we have in Shadowbringers. Once again, we're gonna use FF logs. If you'd like to hear my rants on FF logs and why I'm using it, go all the way back to my State of the Paladin video. It's right in the beginning. You cannot miss it. We're going to use parses to determine how popular a certain job is. Again, imperfect. You can hear my rant in the State of the Paladin video. But in both Eden's Promise and Verse, White Mage is pretty dominant. We don't have any data on Eden's Gate. I'm sorry, it's just not there. Keep in mind, healers are split into two categories, shield and pure. Before Endwalker, the only shield healer was Scholar. So typically what a lot of stacks like to do is have one shield and one pure. So between White Mage and Astrologian, those are our two pure healers. Looks like more raiders and Shadowbringers prefer White Mage, which is just interesting. Before I even go into the Endwalker results, I am just shocked to see how popular White Mage is in Savage content. Again, with the data provided by FF logs, it's imperfect. But still, I guess in my mind, White Mage being the older, more mainstream healer, if that makes sense, would be a turnoff. One thing you may be wondering is, do numbers matter? And I made a point in this series to really separate the performance and raw numbers from popularity. It's something I've kind of learned throughout the first 5 episodes. Links in the description, by the way. But more often than not, FF14 Savage Raiders just play what they want, which is great, by the way. It actually makes things more interesting. There is more speculation to be had. For example, Paladin has had a number of times where its damage is higher than other tanks, yet in Endwalker is still the least played, at least as far as our data goes, tank in Savage content. By a mile. A bit of a side tangent, but I thought it was cool, I thought it was relevant. And with healers specifically, I don't feel the need to look at healing numbers. Look, healers, you play an important role, but let's be real. You're just a DPS with extra steps. I said it. I healed P5S once on stream. I get it. I've healed, but enough waiting. Let's look at Endwalker. 6.0 Asphodelos, White Mage finds itself in second place behind Sage. I mean, come on, it's the new job. Of course it's gonna be number 1. Where things do get interesting is in 6.1, where it reclaims its spot at the top. I won't spend too much time talking about Astro. It'll have its own state of video as soon as I can get it level capped, but it is still pretty interesting to see just how dominant White Mage is right here when compared to its other pure healer counterpart. Not too much to say on Asphodelos. It's one of those tiers, like most, where players stick to what they like. For example, players pick Warrior overwhelmingly when it comes to tanks. Warrior is not doing the most damage, therefore we can assume that players just pick whatever the f they want. Awesome. However, we do have Endwalker's first ultimate DSR to look at. I won't spend too much time on ultimates. Full transparency, I have not done these yet. I don't have a lot of insights I can provide. I don't want to say something stupid. Well, that's not true. I say stupid stuff all the time, but still. I'll leave it to you, wonderful people in the comments, to help me fill in the gaps, because I'd love to know if Astrologian had a certain quirk that makes it a bit more viable in DSR. Because yeah, Astrologian is a lot closer to White Mage than it was in Asphodelos. I just find that interesting. But with 6.1, it is going to be more of the same, with White Mage being a bit more dominant. Now moving into Abyssos, that that gap just keeps getting bigger, huh? I mean, I'm honestly curious, is it Astro's playstyle? Like, I know this is a White Mage video, but goddamn. I'll do my best to find out on my own, but I'd love to hear any additional insight from you lovely healers in the comments. Up to this point, there's been no major reworks or buffs to really any healer that I can see, at least. One thing of note is with Abyssos is just how off the tuning was for those first few weeks. It was a pretty big deal at the time, and something I do like to note every time I talk about it, because one could speculate that certain week 1 teams would gravitate to using White Mage over Astrologian because of its damage output. I mean, it's a pretty big gap, and even with progress in gear, those early few weeks hypothetically could have set a trend for the rest of the tier. I mean, think about it. If you're invested in raids, chances are you are following others who raid as well, and you're probably watching the race to world first. Just something to think about. Nonetheless, this trend would continue into 6.3, but let's just table this discussion. Just take a nice stretch, reach over, and just tap that sub button. Tap it. I put a lot of work into this channel. We've seen a ton of growth lately. Thank you, by the way. And believe it or not, I certainly can't. We are closing in on 1,000 subscribers, so thank you. Help us get across that line. I really appreciate it. And thank you to our members. Yeah, we do that now. But yes, thank you to our members, Axiaris and Brendan Tolentino. Your support means the absolute world to me. Like, you'll never know how much that means. Now let's continue on to Endwalker's second ultimate Omega protocol. Don't even need to say it at this point. I mean, White Mage is just insanely popular. But more than that, I just want to add that White Mage has some pretty good damage too. I know we kind of talked about it with Abyssos. I know I said damage isn't something I like to look at, but I don't have much else to say on TOP. Again, I haven't done ultimates yet, and I find it interesting. And it's my video. And shut up. But yeah, White Mage is consistently near the top, or just on the top for damage. Crazy, absolutely nuts. FF1 White Mage would be very proud. But yeah, the trend continues onto our current patch, both for TOP and Abyssos, our current raid tier. Again, I don't have a lot to say. All we can do now is just guess. Yes, White Mage is doing great damage, but is there more to it than that? Abyssos, as well as Abyssos, didn't release with any major controversies or tuning issues. And, well, healing doesn't really matter either. It's a very similar scenario to tanks, where again, you're just playing a DPS with extra steps. Like, yeah, you're healing, but what are you doing when you're not healing? You're spinning. But to add to that, at least to my knowledge, every single healer, week 1, can clear the heal checks this expansion. I don't think there's ever been a time where you needed to pick one healer over the other, which is a great thing, by the way. Amazing. But if you care about numbers, the next set of data to look at is damage. Couple that with sometimes some pretty tight DPS checks. Like, that healer damage could be the difference between a 1% wipe or a clear. Again, that's why I don't like looking at the healing numbers. But to get back to it, if I really had to guess, I think we have a similar scenario to Warrior this expansion, where it's just popular. People like it. If you remember with Warrior in particular, whenever damage wasn't a factor, think Abyssos or Abyssos, Warrior tends to do a lot better. But even then, in a first for the series, White Mage is consistent with its rankings both in parse numbers and in damage. So it's one, if not all, of 3 things. Raiders like the damage output, Raiders just like White Mage, or Raiders just f***ing hate Astrologian. For me, it's the second one. I can't lie. I like spinning. It's simple, and it puts my mind at ease, like a meditation. Not something I'd play long term in the slightest, but as an alt, count me in. But that's all I got. Subscribe.